I hope you're having a fantastic day today. It's Sarah here, just reading the third story in our trilogy about Emily, Jake and Hannah. And this story is called Emily on Lyra. 10-year-old Emily and her older brother and sister, Jake, aged 12, and Hannah, aged 13, lived in London with their parents, Mr. and Mrs. Edwards, Hamish the dog, and two black cats known as Sam and Daisy. If you'd met the children, you wouldn't have noticed anything unusual about them or their lives. But at night time, it was a bit different. Every night since Emily had been 5, the 3 children, and sometimes Hamish and the cats, travelled together in the same dream. They had had more adventures in the last 5 years than most people had experienced in a lifetime. From Africa to Antarctica, climbing mountains to spending evenings in an ice cream shop, they had been blessed with so many amazing experiences. In the beginning, each dream had been a surprise, but now the children had learnt how to choose going to a particular place by imagining themselves there, smelling the exciting scents, and hearing the sounds and feeling so excited about it. They had also received lots of help from God after they had prayed for it. 1 week ago, they had visited a space station where they had met a very loving being called Lyra. Lyra had invited them to his planet, Lyra. And last night he had spoken telepathically to them. That meant he had spoken into their minds. And he had asked them if they'd like to visit. Oh, yes, please. They have been so excited ever since meeting him and so looking forward to visiting his planet. This surely had to be the ultimate adventure. They sat together on Jake's bed and said to God that they wanted to travel to Lyra in their dream. And Emily prayed to God for help. God always felt such a friend, and Emily always felt reassured knowing he was going to be on their side. The 3 tried to imagine what it was going to be like on Lyra. It was a little difficult as they really had no idea. Out of the 3, Hannah found it the easiest to imagine. She knew Lyra was blue, but he had told them that most beings, the people on his planet, were white or silver. He had also told them about the enormous plants and trees, so Hannah tried to imagine herself there, touching and smelling them, and admiring their very bright colours. Jake noticed that Hamish and the cats were on their beds, and he knew that if they were still there when they went to sleep, that they would join them on their adventures. Jake thought it wasn't the best idea to take them to Lyra, but Hamish, Sam and Daisy had other ideas. As soon as Jake put Hamish on the floor, he jumped straight back onto the bed, and the cats dug their claws into the bedclothes and held on tight. Everyone wanted to go to Lyra. It took longer for the 3 to go to sleep that night, because they were so excited. But eventually they surrendered, and when midnight came, they found themselves standing with Lyra in a beautiful domed building. It was unlike anything they had seen before. The walls shone, and they were so thin that you could see through them. The 3 were so grateful when they looked down, because they could see that Hamish, Sam and Daisy were on lead so they couldn't run off. On more than one occasion, Emily, Jake and Hamish had spent half their dream trying to find them after they'd gone exploring. Welcome, Lyra spoke into their minds. His love was so strong, it was as though it filled every part of their bodies. Emily felt as though she was going to melt. It was so delicious. You could tell he was sending love to Hamish and the cats as well, as they were all staring at him and the cats were purring so loudly. It's wonderful that you came to visit. Let me show you around, he said. Emily, Hannah, Jake, Hamish, Sam and Daisy followed him outside. They had been expecting something different, but it was far more amazing than they had ever imagined. Most of the beings were white or silver, and it was as though the silver ones were made of glitter. The effect was magical. Marcia introduced them to such a being, who introduced herself as Amla. The three children just stared as she sparkled and rippled. In the middle of her chest was a huge pink shape which seemed to stretch backwards to eternity. The love coming from it was so strong that the children almost had to sit down. Hamish and the cats did sit down. They stared at her too, and their eyes were filled with love. "It's so wonderful to meet you," she sent to their minds. "Marcia has told me all about you." She went silent for a moment before telling them that she had called a vehicle for their use. Hannah, Jake, and Emily grinned at each other. They wished they could call their car back home when they needed it. A pod or a bobble was the best description of the vehicle. It stopped at their feet and the doors automatically opened. There were only seats inside. "It's mind control," said Amla. "Jump in and sit down." The three sat with Hamish and the cats on their laps, and the cats were still purring, and it was as though Hamish were chuckling. They'd never heard him make that sound before. The pod lifted up a little and sped along the ground. There were so many pods seemingly travelling in all directions, but it was as though they could sense each other. Each pod gently slowed down when another came close. Emily, Hannah, and Jake were mesmerised. It was all so magical. And even though they couldn't see anybody singing, they could all hear the most beautiful song gently washing over them, easing their minds and their hearts. The sights were just incredible. The flowers and trees were enormous, about three times the size of the ones on Earth, and the colours were so bright and different from any colours they'd ever seen before. The sky, instead of blue, was a gentle pink, and it seemed so clear and light. And it had 3 suns. They could also see other planets and moons, even though it was daytime. It was amazing. The pod stopped alongside a path, and as they got out and walked along, Marcia pointed out some of the animals and birds that lived there. They looked so different colours, different shapes. Some walked on 2 feet, some had 6 legs, some had 3 heads, some even hovered. But the most amazing difference was the 3 children could hear them and understand every word the animals said to each other. And because Emily, Jake, and Hannah, Hamish, Sam, and Daisy were unlike anything the animals had ever seen before, the animals were very excited, and they all came over to say hello and talk to them. They were so happy and so joyful, and they too had love coming from their hearts. The children felt as though they were home. They knew this was one dream they would remember forever. And as happened in all their dreams, they sat down for a picnic. It was, of course, the nicest food they'd ever eaten, and judging by the way that Hamish and the cats licked their lips, they thought so too. "God has said that you can just wake up and be home this time," said Marcia, "but would you like me to take you home in my spaceship instead?" "Oh, yes, please," the 3 said excitedly. "That would be wonderful," continued Emily. "Thank you so much." Marcia shut his eyes. It wasn't long before his spaceship appeared in the sky above. Wow, they could call their spaceships too. There was a shimmer and a slight wobble, and the children found themselves inside the spaceship. "Strap yourselves in," said Marcia. "We're going to be going very fast." The journey went by so quickly, and it seemed too soon before they were hovering above their house in London. Marcia gave a huge hug and a big burst of love. "We will meet again soon," he said. Emily, Jake, and Hannah gave him a burst of love back. "Brilliant," they all said together. The next minute, they were back in their beds, planning their next trip to Lyra. "Can we come too?" Hamish and the cats sent to their minds. Emily, Hannah and Jake stopped talking and looked in amazement. "Oh, wow," said Emily. "We can hear you." "Yes," she said. "Of course." Well, I hope you enjoyed that story. You too can make things happen. You can pray to God for help, and you can also help things come into your world by imagining what they look like, imagining what they feel like, what they sound like and smell like, and feeling really excited about it and really grateful that you have it. And that's something that you need to do every day. Okay, I hope to see you again soon. Many blessings. Bye for now.